She told me, take a deep breath, this might feel really good. But I never expected how it would change everything. It was just another routine checkup. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I stepped into the sterile, too bright waiting room. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of hand sanitizer. I could feel the nervous energy stirring in my stomach, the kind of unease that always hit me when I wasn't sure what to expect. I hadn't been to the doctor in months, and now that I was here, I couldn't shake the feeling that this visit was more than just about my health. I shifted in my seat, the plastic of the waiting room chair cold against the back of my legs, and tried to settle my nerves. The low hum of fluorescent lights overhead did little to help my anxiety, but when the door opened and she walked in, everything else seemed to fade into the background. She was calm. Graceful, even. Her movements were sure and effortless, like she knew exactly where she was going and why. She was in her early 40s, with a quiet confidence that immediately caught my attention. Dark hair tied neatly back, a few wisps framing her face. Her uniform, a simple navy blue scrub, fit perfectly, as though it were tailored just for her. But it wasn't just her appearance that struck me. It was the way she carried herself, the gentle authority in her eyes, and the soft but steady smile she gave me as she introduced herself as Nurse Amelia. "Hello," she said, her voice warm, yet somehow professional, as though she already understood my unease without me saying a word. "I'm going to be taking care of you today. How are you feeling?" I swallowed, a little caught off guard by how easy it felt to talk to her. I hadn't expected her to make me feel so comfortable right away. "I'm fine, just here for the checkup," I replied, forcing my voice to sound casual, even though my heart was racing for reasons I couldn't fully explain. She nodded, her gaze holding mine just a little longer than necessary. There was something in her eyes, something kind, yet knowing. "Don't worry," she said with a reassuring smile. "I'll make sure you're all set in no time." I followed her into the exam room, the air inside colder than I anticipated, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above. Nurse Amelia gestured for me to sit on the exam table, a simple yet necessary action that somehow felt strangely intimate. As I climbed up, the paper crinkled under me, the sound too loud in the stillness of the room. She glanced at the clipboard in her hands, then back at me, her eyes scanning me with an attentiveness that made me feel seen, really seen, more than I expected from a stranger. She began to check my vitals, taking my blood pressure first. As she wrapped the cuff around my arm, her fingers brushed lightly against my skin. It was a simple touch, barely a moment, but it left a trail of warmth across my arm. For a second, I couldn't focus on anything else but the way her fingers lingered, how gentle yet firm her grip was. The touch was professional, of course, but it felt personal, too. Unbidden, my heart started to race faster. "Relax," she said, her voice soft, almost coaxing. "Deep breaths. You're doing great." Her voice was calm, steady, and for a split second, I forgot why I was nervous. Her presence, somehow both calming and magnetic, shifted the atmosphere in the room. I took a deep breath, trying to ease the tightness in my chest, but my mind kept drifting back to her, how she looked, how she made me feel. She leaned in closer to check the cuff, her breath brushing against the side of my neck. For a brief moment, I felt her presence fill the space between us, too close, but in a way that made the tension in my chest feel almost good. My pulse quickened, and I wondered if she noticed. Or if she even cared. The room felt smaller now. She glanced up at me, her lips curling slightly as if she knew something I didn't. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but instead, she focused on her task. Still, the weight of her gaze lingered, and the air between us seemed charged with something I couldn't define. I shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe, just maybe, she did. The tension between us lingered, but it was unspoken. As Nurse Amelia continued with her duties, I couldn't help but feel the weight of every small movement she made. The way her fingers glided over the equipment, the ease with which she navigated around the room, it was as if she was in complete control, and I was simply caught in her orbit. She moved to check my vitals once more, her soft voice breaking the silence. "How have you been feeling lately?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the chart. The question, simple and mundane, should have felt impersonal, but in the quiet of the room, it held a different weight. "I've been a bit stressed," I admitted, surprised by how easily the words came. It felt strange to be so open, but there was something about her calm presence that made it feel natural. She didn't rush me, didn't press me for more details, but I could see the concern in her eyes as she wrote something down on the chart. She paused, her pen resting against the paper. "Stress can be hard to manage on your own. Sometimes, it helps to talk about it." She said it gently, but I could tell there was more to her words, an invitation, unspoken but clear. I glanced up at her, meeting her eyes for a fraction of a second longer than I intended. There was a softness there, a kindness that made me feel vulnerable. Her gaze was steady but not probing, like she was waiting for me to say more, to open up. But the moment passed, and she moved on to the next part of the exam, her fingers brushing across my wrist as she checked my pulse again. That simple touch sent a jolt through me, and I instinctively pulled my arm away, just a fraction, enough to create space between us. But she didn't seem to notice, or maybe, she did. She simply adjusted her stance, as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Her touch wasn't just professional, it felt deliberate, measured, like it was meant to convey something more. As she continued with her work, I felt an odd sense of discomfort, mixed with a strange pull toward her. She was just doing her job, I reminded myself, but everything about this moment felt too personal. The small, almost imperceptible way she moved, the way she never seemed to hurry, made me feel like I was the only patient in the world. It was an intimacy I hadn't expected, and it unsettled me more than I cared to admit. She stepped back for a moment, giving me space. "All set for now," she said, her voice almost too light, as if trying to break the tension. But her eyes lingered on me for a second too long, and I wondered if she felt it too, the unspoken connection that hung between us, thick and undeniable. The stillness in the room seemed to stretch, like time itself had decided to slow down. Nurse Amelia moved around me with deliberate care, her movements precise, but there was something different this time, something more than just the routine checkup. I could feel her presence more acutely, like the air was charged with an invisible current, pulling us closer with each passing second. "Lie back, please," she instructed softly, guiding me onto my back with a professional touch. The coolness of the exam table sent a slight shiver through my body as I reclined, but it wasn't just the chill that made me uneasy, it was the way her hands briefly grazed my shoulders as she adjusted the positioning. Her touch was firm, but there was a tenderness in it that seemed to linger longer than necessary. As she moved to prepare the stethoscope, her eyes met mine for a brief, fleeting moment. There was a quiet understanding in her gaze, something unspoken but palpable. She took a step closer, her face now just inches from mine, and my breath hitched in my chest. The room felt smaller, the space between us narrowing with every passing second. "Take a deep breath," she said, her voice low and soothing, the words carrying a gentle command that I couldn't ignore. "This might feel really good." I hesitated for just a moment, unsure of what to expect. My heart skipped a beat as her hands moved to place the stethoscope against my chest. The sensation of her fingers on my skin sent a wave of warmth through me, and I felt myself tense for a brief second. But then, the rhythm of her touch, the gentle press of the stethoscope, grounded me. The sound of my own heartbeat pulsed in my ears, but it was her closeness that seemed to resonate deeper. I took a slow, steady breath, just as she had asked, but I wasn't prepared for the way my body responded to her nearness. It wasn't just the physical sensation of the stethoscope against my chest, it was the way she leaned in, her presence so close, so intimate. I could feel her warmth radiating toward me, and the soft rustle of her uniform as she shifted slightly made my pulse quicken. For a moment, I wondered if she could feel the way my heart was racing, if she could hear it through the stethoscope. The tension between us was thick, almost electric, as I struggled to keep my composure. Her face was so close now, and I couldn't help but notice the way the light caught the curve of her cheek, the subtle lines that marked her years of experience in a profession that demanded so much. The air between us felt charged, almost suffocating, and yet, I couldn't look away from her. She was calm, composed, but there was something in her gaze now, something softer, more vulnerable, that mirrored the fluttering uncertainty in my chest. And then, just as quickly, she pulled back, breaking the moment. "Your heart sounds great," she said, her voice returning to its usual professional tone. But there was an unspoken acknowledgement in the way she looked at me, as if we both knew something had just shifted between us. The air no longer felt so heavy, but the tension, quiet, unacknowledged, lingered in the space we shared. The atmosphere in the room seemed to thicken, as if the air itself had become heavier, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Nurse Amelia moved about with professional grace, checking off her routine tasks as I tried, unsuccessfully, to keep my focus. There was a stillness between us, punctuated only by the soft sounds of her moving around the room. Yet beneath that calm, something more charged was taking root, something I couldn't ignore. The sound of her voice broke through the silence again. "Are you managing your stress well?" she asked, her tone softer now, almost probing. She was taking a step beyond the standard medical questions, and I could feel her sincerity. There was something about the way she looked at me, something genuine, like she was truly concerned, but also inviting me to open up. I shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to answer. My usual responses to questions like that were rehearsed, short, clipped, easy to avoid. But something about her made it harder to hide. "I've been a little overwhelmed," I confessed, surprising even myself. There was no real reason to open up here, with her. But somehow, it felt like the right thing to do, as though her presence alone gave me permission to be vulnerable. She didn't rush me, didn't offer platitudes or advice right away. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes not leaving mine. "It's okay to feel that way," she said softly, and there was an understanding in her words that settled into the space between us. It wasn't just her tone, though, it was the way she stood, the slight tilt of her head, as if she was genuinely listening, really hearing what I was saying. There was a quiet empathy in her, and it made me feel both lighter and heavier at the same time. The words hung between us, and for a moment, the professional barriers that usually defined the relationship between a patient and a nurse seemed to fade away. She wasn't just performing her job anymore, she was engaging with me on a deeper level, inviting me into a kind of emotional intimacy I hadn't expected. The silence stretched as she moved closer, stepping lightly around the table to adjust my position. Her hand brushed my arm as she did, and it was as if the world outside the room had ceased to exist for just a moment. The simple touch was brief, yet it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't like the usual professional contact I had experienced during the checkup, it was different, more personal. The warmth of her fingers lingered in my skin, sending an unexpected shiver down my spine. Her touch was light, but there was an intensity in it that left me unsettled. It wasn't just a routine check anymore, it was a moment of connection. I found myself holding my breath, not knowing what to say or how to react. She seemed unaware of the effect she was having on me, and yet, something in the air felt charged. The silence was no longer awkward, it was pregnant with something else, something heavier, and I could feel the space between us closing in a way that both thrilled and unnerved me. "Everything's normal," she said, as she finished her checks. But her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. A subtle shift in the way she looked at me made my heart skip a beat. We both knew this wasn't just a routine checkup anymore. There was something more, something deeper, but neither of us could quite name it. She stepped back, giving me space again, but the tension hadn't gone. It had simply shifted, like a soft current beneath the surface, undisturbed yet undeniable. The moment wasn't over, it had only just begun. As the appointment neared its end, the air in the room felt strangely still, like a breath held for too long. The routine checkup was over, the medical tasks completed, but the space between Nurse Amelia and me remained thick with something unsaid, something neither of us could quite acknowledge. She moved around the room with her usual efficiency, gathering up charts and equipment, but there was a softness in her movements, as though her mind was elsewhere, and her attention lingered on me in a way that felt different. I sat on the edge of the exam table, feeling the coolness of the paper beneath me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the moment wasn't over. The professional boundary between us was still there, but it had become porous, fragile. She was finishing up her notes, but something about the way she paused between each action made me wonder if she was waiting for me to say something. "Is there anything else we need to talk about?" she asked, not looking at me directly, but her voice had a subtle shift in tone. It wasn't just about the appointment anymore. I could hear the underlying question in her words, something more personal, more real. And somehow, I knew she was reaching out, hoping I'd respond in kind. I hesitated, unsure of how to navigate this new, unfamiliar territory. The clinical distance that had once defined the room now felt like a barrier I didn't want to cross. I had been careful to maintain my usual composure, but with every passing second, I felt more vulnerable, more exposed. The vulnerability I had felt earlier was now replaced with a strange mix of desire and hesitation. "No," I said, my voice coming out more softly than I intended. I wanted to say more, but the words seemed to catch in my throat. It was as though my body didn't trust my mind to say what needed to be said. Instead, I kept it simple. "I'm fine, really." But Amelia didn't seem convinced. She turned toward me, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. There was something about the way she looked at me now, something more open, more raw. The subtle walls of professionalism had fallen away, and I could see the real her, the woman behind the nurse's uniform. She was no longer just the calm, efficient caregiver, she was someone with her own feelings, her own story. "You don't have to keep it in, you know," she said, her voice low and almost intimate. "Sometimes, it helps to talk about things. To let them out." I could feel the weight of her words settle over me, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind raced, unsure of what to say, unsure if this was the moment to admit the truth I had been hiding even from myself. But her presence, her quiet understanding, made me want to open up, to be real. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "It's just, life, you know. It's been a lot lately. Work, everything. I'm just tired." She nodded, and her expression softened further. "I get it," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We all have our moments. It's okay to feel like that." The way she said it, the way she didn't push me to say more but simply offered her understanding, made something inside me unravel. I wanted to tell her more, to explain how I felt like I was constantly running on empty, always trying to keep it together. But I couldn't. Instead, I just let the moment hang between us, silent but meaningful. She took a step closer then, not in a rush but with the same careful grace she had used all along. Her hand reached out, not in an attempt to comfort, but simply to offer reassurance. It rested lightly on my shoulder, the touch gentle but firm. The weight of her hand felt unexpectedly comforting, grounding me in the moment. For a second, I forgot where we were. I forgot that she was my nurse, that there was a professional distance between us that I was supposed to maintain. Her hand was warm on my skin, and for the first time since I'd walked into this room, I felt seen, truly seen, not just as a patient, but as a person. "I'm here," she said quietly, her voice steady but full of quiet emotion. "You don't have to carry it alone." Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment, I wondered if she understood just how much that simple gesture had affected me. It wasn't just about the comfort her words offered, but the way she made me feel, heard, validated, and not so alone in a world that often felt overwhelming. And in that moment, I realized something: this wasn't just a checkup anymore. It was a turning point. The beginning of something that neither of us could define yet, but which had already begun to change everything. The days after my last visit felt different. I couldn't shake the lingering sensation of Nurse Amelia's presence, the warmth of her hand on my shoulder, the softness in her voice, the way her eyes had locked onto mine with an understanding that made everything else seem less important. I tried to push it from my mind, telling myself that it was just a fleeting connection, something born of the moment. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to resurface, uninvited, like a quiet, nagging thought I couldn't escape. A week later, I found myself back in the clinic, the routine visit nothing more than a formality. But this time, there was an undercurrent of anticipation running through me. The receptionist had greeted me with her usual smile, but it was the thought of seeing Amelia again that made my heart beat just a little faster. When she appeared in the doorway, I almost felt my breath catch in my chest. Nurse Amelia stood there, her presence commanding yet somehow gentle, as she motioned for me to follow her into the exam room. This time, there was a subtle shift between us. The formalities were still there, the polite smiles, the standard medical greetings, but beneath it all, there was something deeper, something neither of us could fully express yet. "You're back," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "How have you been feeling?" I glanced at her, noting the small changes, the way she held herself just a little differently, the way her eyes seemed to linger on me for a fraction longer than before. It was as if she were waiting for me to say something more, something real. But I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep things light, to pretend that everything was fine. But I couldn't ignore the way my pulse quickened in her presence, the way the air felt charged with something unspoken. "I'm better, I think," I said finally, unsure of whether I was telling the truth or simply saying what felt expected. "I've been trying to take it easy, like you suggested." Her eyes softened, and she nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. It's important to listen to your body, to give yourself a break." She moved closer to me then, her hand brushing against my arm as she adjusted something on the table. The contact was brief, but it felt significant. It was like a quiet confirmation that we both knew this wasn't just about a medical checkup anymore. There was something more here, something neither of us was willing to fully acknowledge. For a moment, I thought I might say something, some confession that had been building up inside me since the last time we'd been together. But the words didn't come. Instead, I found myself caught in the stillness of the moment, the weight of her gaze making my heart race. We stood there for a beat, just the two of us, locked in an understanding that neither of us had vocalized. It was in the way she didn't pull away from the silence, how she didn't rush through her tasks, how the space between us seemed to draw us closer. There was no need for words. Everything I wanted to say was already there, woven into the air around us, thick with unspoken possibilities. "I'll be right back," she said, breaking the moment gently. But as she walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us, something that couldn't be undone. We had crossed an invisible line, one that neither of us had expected but both felt now, in the quiet tension that filled the room. The soft hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights greeted me as I walked in for my next appointment, but this time, it felt different. There was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made my heart race a little faster. My previous visits had always been routine, professional, a quick checkup, a few polite exchanges, and then I was on my way. But now, as I stood in the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. When the receptionist called my name, I felt a strange flutter in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was just nerves or the quiet hope that I would see her again. Nurse Amelia. Her name echoed in my mind as I made my way to the examination room. The last time I had seen her, the connection between us had felt so real, so undeniable. But I hadn't allowed myself to dwell on it, not yet. As I stepped into the exam room, she was there, already preparing the equipment. Her back was to me, but the moment she turned and caught sight of me, I felt a small rush of relief. She smiled, a smile that was softer than the professional ones she usually wore, like it carried with it an understanding that neither of us had said aloud. "Back again?" Her voice was familiar, comforting, with a subtle warmth I hadn't fully noticed before. The tone was light, but there was something in the way she said it, something beneath the surface that made me pause. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual, though I could feel the tension growing inside me. "Just a follow-up. How've you been?" She hesitated for a moment, and I could tell she wasn't just answering the question on autopilot. Her eyes met mine for a moment longer than usual, and there was something unspoken in the way she looked at me, something that felt almost like a question, a challenge. "I'm good," she said, her voice steady but carrying a hint of vulnerability. "Busy, but good." There was a brief silence as we stood there, neither of us quite sure where to go from here. The professional distance that once defined our interactions seemed less defined now, almost like it had been softened by the quiet moments we'd shared. She motioned for me to sit on the exam table, and as I did, I noticed the smallest shift in her posture. She was closer than before, her presence more familiar, almost comforting. The room felt smaller now, like the space between us had shrunk without either of us realizing it. The conversation flowed more easily this time. There was a lightness to it, a feeling that we were no longer just the nurse and the patient. There was a connection there, something real, that neither of us could ignore anymore. As she finished the last of the routine checks, she placed her hand on my shoulder, the touch warm and solid, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. I could feel the quiet intensity of it, the unspoken bond between us that had been building ever since our first encounter. "Take care of yourself," she said, her voice quieter now. It wasn't just a polite sign-off, it was a reminder, a small but meaningful gesture. It wasn't about the checkup anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had quietly begun to grow between us. As I left the room, I couldn't help but feel that we had crossed a threshold. We were no longer just strangers. There was a quiet understanding now, a beginning that had no name, but was somehow more significant than any words could convey. And as I walked out of the clinic, I knew that this was just the start. The start of something uncertain, but undeniably real.